Hi, and welcome to Pros and Conversations. My name is Peter Reynolds. Pros and Conversations is a podcast that explores what it takes to be successful, whether you're from the world of business, science, or the arts. We've spoken a lot about branding on the podcast, how your company is perceived, that goes beyond just a logo or a name or a tagline. It's that feeling people get when they see or hear your logo or your tagline. But now a lot of entrepreneurs are starting to be concerned and want to manage their personal brand, that unique mixture of expertise, personality, and reputation. And joining me today to talk about that is someone whose brand is that perfect combination of expertise and humility. We have Damon Adachi, who is the marketing consultant with Sevenfold Marketing. How you doing, Damon?
I'm doing well. It's a good day. I'm having a good hair day, and I'm ready to be the Bullwinkle to your Rocky. So let's rock and roll.
Well, I thought we might just chat briefly about, your personal brand, because it's a very powerful marketing tool, isn't it?
It is. And, when we deal a lot with solopreneurs and small business owners, and I think you underestimate how important your personal brand is. You get very tied up in thinking, I've got to be the best at what I do, and I've got to deliver on time, and I've got to be reliable. And those things contribute to your personal brand, but there's a lot more that goes behind it, and how your messaging is community building and truth based and really delivers integrity. So it comes naturally to a lot of us, but it is something that you still need to put some thought behind.
Yeah, it's interesting, if we show people a logo of, Nike or Apple, they're immediately going to get a sense of, what that brand is all about. But the same goes for individuals. If people are seeing an Elon Musk or a Richard Branson or a Donald Trump, for good or ill, they're knowing exactly sort of what they're getting.
Definitely. And obviously you want to put the best foot forward in all of those things. But it's more than just, your personality. It's a lot of what you stand for and your values, and making sure that those are communicated clearly and on point, and that you do what you'll say you're going to do and follow through with everything that you promise.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited because I think we have a guest who can really help us navigate this subject. Joining us today is Tasha Kheiriddin, who is a principal at Navigator. She's one of Canada's best known political commentators. She is the co-chair of the Jean Charest Leadership Campaign, and she's an author. Her latest book is The Right Path: How Conservatives Can Unite, Inspire, and Take Canada Forward. Tasha, welcome to Pros and Conversations.
Oh, thank you so much, Peter. And thank you, Damon. It's just great to be here.
Yeah, I wanted to jump right into it, Tasha, and talk a little bit about sort of your personal brand and, as your career has progressed, how you've sort of managed it. Has that been a conscious decision? Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's conscious and unconscious. And to the point that Damon made, I think it's about being who you are and being authentic. That's one thing I've learned in terms of brand building. I work at a firm at Navigator. We do strategic consulting in part around branding and campaigns, sometimes for public affairs and other things, where we also emphasize to our clients, it's the same thing. You've got to be authentic. Otherwise, people see through that. And so for me, I started off as a lawyer many, many years ago. And I left the law and then got into media, and always with a sort of political bent, as you said, political commentary. I worked at think tanks on policy, but I would be commenting on issues that were always in the news. So for me, my brand was conservative because I had been involved in party politics, but I was no longer a partisan, right? I wasn't attached to the party anymore. I did that when I started working in journalism and media. I depoliticized. So that was a challenge for my brand in a way, because people still assumed, and now it's different. I'm back in the fold, but for the 20 years that I was not a member of the party, people still sometimes assumed I was. So I always had to make an effort to say, look, it's a small C conservative. I am not branding myself as I'm not a fan of the party. I will criticize the party. I will criticize. And so in my writing, I was always very honest about how I felt. And sometimes people didn't like that. Some of them would say, well, why are you dumping on it? Well, I'm not a partisan. I would say that's part of my brand is that I'm an analyst. I'm independent. That's why people listen to me. So that was one of the important things was being authentic to not being, as they say in French, parti pris. And I think otherwise, it was simply also defining myself as a media person after having been a lawyer and more political. Many people go to school for journalism. They study. I did not do that. I was sort of plucked by the CBC to help co-produce a show. And that show got me into sort of political current affairs journalism. But I had to learn a lot along the way, and I had to be also kind of humble. I relate to that because there were things I had to know. So I didn't try to present myself as, my brand wasn't like I know everything or whatever. It's also I'm curious. I want to learn. And so that I think helped, especially when I was working in the business, connecting with other people that, they didn't feel like I was just coming in like, I know better than you. I was always making the effort to like, you have something to teach me.
That's incredible. So I have a question for you. I know I've read in your words, you've said you both love and loathe social media in equal parts at different times. Especially in the political spectrum, what is your relationship with social media in terms of as a communications tool and supporting your brand?
Social media is a double-edged sword. It is a place where careers go to die. They go to be made and they go to die. It's really, I've seen both extremes, and I've tried to avoid, both, in the sense that in my case, I had already made a lot of my name outside before social media became really a thing. In the last decade, I would say, has really been the ascent of social media. So I was kind of already known, but it was navigating that world. And a lot of political people, you see it now more than anything, is that it becomes, their brand is all what they're about. And you start to worry, where's the substance? Is it just making a great video and, getting on Six Buzz Toronto and that sort of thing? And when you talk to younger people involved in politics, that is where they get their news. That is where they see things is online. And so, of course, politicians will migrate to where the eyeballs are. But at the same time, you have to be authentic, like I said earlier, and you have to have something to back up the fizz, because otherwise it will fizzle out. And I think that is the biggest, is not being sucked into that rabbit hole and thinking that's all you have to be doing with your time. You have to have quality content to back it up and depth of understanding. So social media you can also say the wrong thing very easily. That's the other thing. Obviously, people know that, one wrong tweet and suddenly you have a 48-hour cycle of nightmare, and sometimes longer, right? So it's a challenge. It's also a challenge for young people because I think they grew up at a time when they just said anything on social, and then 10 years later they want to run for office and oops, someone digs up a tweet or a Facebook post and they're done.
Absolutely. I think that definitely for young people, I know even for my son, who he's not quite old enough to have his own social media accounts, but I know that's something I'm definitely going to be talking to him about it. They talk about, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. I would say tweet for the job you want, not necessarily the job you have.
100%. I just jump in for a sec because I think that is something that we don't necessarily teach young people about branding. And I know young people brand themselves. They already have a branding culture. They already, their IG, they have certain filters and certain music and choices and things to brand themselves, to stand out or to be, part of a group that is doing well in terms of influencers, sort of catch that wave. You have to think ahead. How will this age? How will this look? How will my brand is this now, but am I going to be a cute little, thing when I'm 35? Well, hopefully it'll still be cute, but you're not going to be when you're 20. So you think of entertainers who've rebranded themselves over the years. I mean, Madonna is the perfect chameleon, right? You think of Lady Gaga has rebranded herself too. Billie Eilish has gone through some really weird rebranding in terms of her image, I find, in the last 5 years. But these, for the average person, they don't have people advising them on these things in the same way. It's harder if you're just a young person and you want to get noticed. I think we have to teach people that, branding starts young now, and you have to think ahead and how is this going to look in, 10, 20 years.
So then the challenge becomes what we spoke about earlier in being authentic, but still having room to evolve.
Yes, I think, and this is the problem with social media is that extremes get attention, right? You see this, you want to stand out. So you do something that's really out there. And whether it's a stunt on YouTube or whatever, a challenge here, okay, that might get you attention now, but is that part of your brand or is it just a cry for attention? So it has to be intentional. I think branding has to be intentional. It's an intentional exercise. Like in politics too, is that you have to really mean what you're doing, and it has to be you, but I always like to say, take the edges off. Like, a little edge is good, but not too sharp, because always easier to move forward than to step back, right? You can always become more intense, but to get less is hard once you've hit a certain level. So give yourself that space to grow, like you just said, Damon. I think it's important.
Yeah, it's interesting you say start early. I might have done it before birth when it came to my son. I don't know about you, but when we were coming up with his name, and my son's name is Griffin, and
That's
I
a nice
wanted a
name.
name. Thank you. I wanted a name that was, unusual, different, but wouldn't curse him. As he got older,
That's thoughtful of you as a parent.
and I just kept thinking, if it was, if he was prime minister, if he was a chief justice, if he, and I kept saying his name, would that work for him? And it does, and his middle initial is his middle name is William, so he's GW Reynolds, so that works as a business GW here. And so I was sort of trying to think of these things.
No pressure, Griffin.
Really? Poor kid. How old is he now?
But it's interesting. I think sort of when we talk about authenticity, just wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges of you've created this brand, or maybe the perceived brand, as you talked about, when it came to being a conservative. How, it must be difficult to sometimes step out of that, because you have this brand that you've built over many years. You want to evolve, but maybe your people find themselves trapped a little bit, in that space.
Well, I think it will trap you if that's all you are. And I think a brand can be, you can have your core brand as to what you are and true to your values and this kind of thing, but you can apply it to different contexts. And it's funny because I was just actually, before talking to you, I was talking to my speaker's agent about the book, The Right Path, and saying, okay, how do we leverage this? And, the political, that's when she said to me, she goes, we have an issue because you're very political, Tasha. I was like, yeah, I know. I said, but there's ways to apply this to business contexts. There's ways to apply this to people who are just concerned about the way that the political landscape, not the conservative landscape, the political landscape is evolving, and how does that impact, investment decisions and other things. I said, so we could take it to that level. You can universalize it. So it's the same with a brand, is that you can say, well, this is my core brand, but how could I leverage it in different spaces? And that's what I mean by not being too extreme on things. I mean, it might get you attention within a core group of people, but you can't break out of that then. You don't have that flexibility because that's all you are. And some people will say, oh, toxic, I'm not touching you. That's too much for me. And especially in the corporate space, we know that companies are much more risk averse, right? Than, environments like political groups and, activist groups. Their business is being, in your face kind of thing. But corporations are much more reserved generally. And so if you want to leverage your brand into a corporate space, you have to think about that. And you say, okay, well, I have my persona, my principles and stuff, but at the same time, I'm gonna be mindful of not being something that would turn people off, without giving up what you stand for, because we know that corporations now are actually much more socially conscious. They are much engaged in ESG, in diversity inclusion. I mean, they listen to people, and they themselves pronounce themselves on social issues. So there's more of that happening. But at the same time, it's more that, you want to be able to offer something broader than just your core brand, because your core brand also, things can disappear. Like if the Conservative Party disappeared tomorrow, who would I talk to, right? That would, if I don't have something broader, what happens? So I have to think of that too, is that you always have to have one eye on, like, not the door, but one eye on how things are going outside your bubble.
Yeah, the relationship between politics and business is so interesting. And in our group, we don't really delve too deep into those political areas because it can be divisive and dangerous in a way. But at the same time, we've all experienced the last 2 years in this country, and it affects us all very strongly. And now your market is very, truth is a very subjective concept, and your integrity can very often be questioned because your truth might not align with somebody else's truth these days. So how do you build community with a brand in a landscape that isn't neutral, that isn't open to your message out of the gate? It's already got its own preconceptions and is very fractured and divisive.
Well, there's some people who won't listen to or won't be interested in your brand. I mean, there's people who are uncertain, who are really, really polarized. It's extremely hard to talk to some of those folks, and that is unfortunate. But I think most people are not at those extremes. They are more in the larger middle group, if you will, both of voters and consumers, and they're open. They're more open. They may have their rabbit holes on their various social feeds that they live within their silo in terms of what they see and what they know, but at the same time they're not so stuck there. So I think you don't want to talk to people who absolutely won't listen to you either. Like beating your head against a wall is no point, because and Twitter's bad for that. People try and convince people on Twitter of things. You're never going to convince someone. You can lead them to make their own conclusion. But if you engage with an argument with a stranger on some arcane point of, whether it's vaccination policy or whether it's abortion or some really hot button issue, well, no, that's not going to, no. Present your point of view, let them think about it, and, know when to step away. Is my question, is my advice too.
No, I agree completely. This idea of, your brand is not going to appeal to everybody, so don't try. And I think in business, with our brand in business, we maybe know that more. We know that we're not going to attract every customer. We know that we have to, be more focused. Because there is a customer out there for us, for our product. We're not going to sell that gadget or gizmo or service to everybody. But when it comes to our personal brand, I think maybe as human beings, the idea of we want to be liked, the idea of that, that there's a segment of the population that doesn't like what we're saying, maybe a lot of people, and myself included, I fall into this trap where you become a little bit milquetoast, because you don't want to offend anybody. But if you say things that have zero chance of offending anyone, then I think you have zero chance of affecting anyone as well.
I think I agree with you. I think that there's a difference between like not wanting to step on toes and saying things or framing your opinion in a way that has integrity. This is why, when people get into ad hominem attacks, they go into the gutter in politics or business or wherever, and they start attacking people to make their point. That just undermines your argument. To me, that's not a good brand. It's not helping your brand. It's extremely negative. Versus you can say the controversial thing, but you back it up, and you, like I said, you don't engage with every single person who disagrees with you, because you're not gonna win those arguments. But you present yourself in a way that is, serious, but also has, and this is important too, I think, a sense of humor. I often deflect people who don't like my brand. I'll make a joke. I'll be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Like that's, it's, I hope you had a good day today kind of thing. If they are dumping all over me on social, like, nice dance. I hope you got outside and didn't work on your computer all day. This kind of thing. So that's one way to sort of, I guess, take the edge off of those attacks. But in terms of your brand, you're right. I mean, I say this to my daughter because I've gotten some real serious hate mail in the course of my journalistic career. And recently I did on an article I wrote about vaccination. And she's like, this is terrible. I had death threats. And I said, yeah, I know, sweetie, that's really wrong. It's terrible. And the police are aware of this one. But you're nobody till somebody hates you. Which is a weird thing to say maybe, but if nobody reacts, Peter, you're absolutely right. If you say nothing that actually gets some people really mad, well, then you are a bit milquetoast. You shouldn't make people mad every single day. But if you have principles that are not, the common thread, and it's something that really matters to you, then say them with integrity and just stand by them.
We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. Pros and Conversations is brought to you by For the Record Productions, providing video production services to corporate and nonprofit clients for over 20 years. To learn more about how we can help your business, visit videosthatmatter.ca. And by the Business Alliance, a professional peer group that helps you grow your business through networking, collaboration, and sound advice. To learn more about how to become a member, visit jointhealliance.biz.
The other thing I think you can do is you can lead with intention. And if you say, look, this is what I'm trying to do, and everybody can get behind that and say, we all want things to be better. And when you lead with intention, you say, so to achieve that, this is my approach. It might not be yours, but if you already see that my intention is coming from a good place, then you can work around my means to the end a little bit, or at least accept it and say, well, that's your way, but we're both on the same page with what we want. So that always helps as well from a brand point of view. And I totally agree with you, Peter. It's easy to say, here's a product and this product stands for something. And if you don't agree with it, then talk to the product. But if it's your face that's out there and you say, this is what I stand for, and somebody says, I don't agree with that, it's really, it's a vulnerable position as a personal brand representative. It's very tough.
Yeah, I think intention is incredibly important to brand. And I applying it to the political realm with which I'm most familiar. I know some politicians who they might completely disagree. Totally different party, different perception, but I really respect them. Many of them are my friends. Why? Because their intention is good. Like you just said, David, it's an intention to make the world a better place. They see it through a different lens. They present themselves with integrity. They don't, their brand isn't cheap, because I think personally, like you have to maintain a certain level of decorum in politics too. Like it isn't anything really, but their tone is respectful, and so I respect them. And I think that if we all did that in our personal brands, respect is a huge thing. Is respecting the other person's right to have their brand and not just tear it down because you disagree with it.
Yeah, we've come back full circle now to the social media problem, where it's so easy to just be negative and faceless and anonymous and say, you suck and drop it right there. Yeah, it's daunting.
Yeah, the pull to troll, the pull to have a quick snarky comment can be powerful, and one has to resist going to the dark side as much as possible. I wanted to talk a little bit about this, basically kind of rising, above the crowd. You've had obviously a lot of incredible opportunities, in your career, from, television host and radio host and columnist. And I'm wondering, in a sea of equals, how does somebody sort of, rise above, with their brand, gain attention? There's so much noise out there. What advice would you have for people trying to do that?
My first piece of advice is be nice. That might sound really basic, but when you're building your brand, you come across a lot of people. In the case of television and media, for example, you cross paths with, hosts who can put you on their show and make your career. But you also cross paths with the makeup artist who will make you look good for that show. And you should treat both with the equal amount of respect. And I say that because it's you get a reputation, and brand is partly reputation also, and how you treat other people. It seeps into it. People know, and this is I've seen this actually in my work at Navigator and my work in corporate communications, is that when your brand runs into trouble, when something bad happens to you or to your product, but like personally, all of a sudden someone trashes you or you put a foot wrong and it's time for some reputation rescue. If you have stuff in the favor bank, if you have a reputation as a nice person outside of, what you have to do, like, you'll give people compliments and you'll be just respectful, and you won't treat, people who, like waiters, you won't treat them with disdain or anything like that. I know people who do it. I don't understand that, but they do. And they think they're better than other people. Well, when you get into trouble, if you've acted that way, good luck to you, because there's no allies who will come out and say, you know what, that person screwed up, but they're a good person. And they did this for me. And I remember this story and this anecdote. And so for me, I found that actually consciously having a public profile has made me maybe a nicer person in some ways, because sometimes we all have that impulse to, yell at the driver over there, or just if someone's really being bad at what they're doing, you're like, oh, just fix it sort of thing. You want to be snarky, but I tend to hold back and I tend to say, okay, like look at it from their perspective, because also, you know what? You don't want someone who's going to go out then on Twitter and say, oh, she was a real bitch today, right? That's how she acted. So it kind of, I think I'm naturally nice to people, but it's also made me conscious of it's part of your brand too. Because if you get into trouble, you want to have backup. You want people to say that, that was a one-time thing, or that's not who they are. If you don't have those people, it's really hard to rescue your brand when it gets into trouble.
Well, they say that about reputation. Your reputation is what people say about you when you're not there. And
Absolutely.
that it's a big part of your brand, beyond expertise, beyond personality, is your reputation.
Yeah.
You think of the people that you've looked up to in your career, in your life, the boss that you've had that was, fantastic and exemplary. They engaged with you. They were human beings. They weren't always perfect. You're right. They were nice. They didn't treat you like somebody beneath them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, it's that human element, that authenticity that we talked about off the top, that makes people engaged and relatable. So, we talk about in your brand, what you want from your marketplace isn't just their spend, it's their trust, it's their testimony, and it's their engagement. And you've got to, really focus on pulling that out of them by being authentic and building community and doing those sorts of things. So I think that's how you rise above the sea of equals that you mentioned before. That's really well put.
Yeah, and I think engaging also in things that matter to you. If you're gonna be all about an issue or a cause, well, do something like do the 10K walk, or organize an event, or sit on a board, for example, of an organization that helps people in that situation or something. Sort of walk the walk. I mean, that's otherwise you're advising other people, but you're not actually doing it. So it's less authentic. So for your brand, I think it's important. And again, that goes to the allies piece, because people will then say, yeah, I worked with her on this project and she's really committed. And so when she talks about the issue, it's sincere, it's genuine. So that engagement is important too, is walking the walk for your brand.
Yeah, walking the walk. Absolutely. That totally makes sense. And it can be challenging, I found. I never had to think about, or at least I didn't think about my personal brand, when it came to my business, because it was, I was sort of behind the scenes. But I think it was, and you probably similar experience, when you become a writer and suddenly you start to develop, and as a children's author, I was definitely developing. There was a brand, there was what people expected. I wasn't going to, drop a lot of F-bombs, on tweets.
Not a lot, just a couple.
Just a couple.
One or two maybe, but
there's that famous book, Go the F to Sleep.
Yes,
which is narrated, that
beautiful.
one, every parent can relate to that. Yeah.
I wish I'd written that. I
know.
Really, oh my goodness. But it's interesting because, and sometimes it can kind of sneak up on you. It's like I was, I wrote a book called Stitches in Time Travel that had two moms. The main character has two moms. And I got a lot of advice from fellow authors. They said, you have to let people know that, even though it's not a major part of the story, it has nothing really to do with the plot. You have to say that on the back. You've got to say Charlotte and her two moms, because you're building this brand as a children's author. You will get people who are mad at you for quote unquote tricking them, into reading your book that somehow has a gay agenda. And that was the first time I was like, what? I have to worry about that now? And, to Damon's point, this idea of, readers that would actually be offended by that. I don't want those readers, but I think you still have to be sort of aware of it and try to handle it in as nice a way, as you were saying, as you can.
Yeah, it's honest too. I would have just thought, I wasn't. It's funny the reaction your friends had, saying that people would feel tricked into reading it, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't want my child to read that." And there are some people who, unfortunately, will still feel that way. But to me, it was more that it's a positive to say that, because you're breaking ground for stories about different kinds of families that exist today, and that these kids want to feel like they're included and they're just like every other kid. So I see it as a positive thing, but I think it can cut both ways. I think what you want to do is you want to be honest, and you also find a niche, right? Your brand is maybe that's the niche, is like breaking barriers or diversity stories for kids or whatever it is, because it's sort of a long tail of marketing, right? You don't want to pigeonhole yourself too much, but you need to also find the audience for anything. And a book in particular, one of the first questions that the potential publisher will ask you is, well, who's going to buy it? Yep. Why should I invest in this? How many copies are we going to sell, and to whom? So you have to be able to answer that question.
Right. And what we've always said is that, if you really want to have the best chance of success in business, you have to totally understand who your target audience is and your target client, and profile them the best you can. And even though, we could admit that today things are very divisive and polarized, it also provides you with a lot more information about your market segment. Before, you might be segmenting on just gender or location or demographics of those natures. And now you have another whole palette of whether it's political persuasions or ideologies that you can really root into and dive into people's passion about something, even though it's going to alienate another portion of the market. It's still more information that you can use from a business standpoint on how to target and be more successful.
Sure. It goes so you can't be everything to everyone, right? And you shouldn't try. You know, be true to yourself. Realize there are limitations as to, you know, the fan base you can cultivate, or people who will like you. Recognize some people will hate you, but that's their decision. And you know, I don't think you purposely court the hatred or the haters, as Taylor Swift would call them. But they will come because some people just have a really different view than you, and some people choose to hate too. They choose, that's their thing, right? So they will go after people just for whatever purpose, sometimes maybe to make their own brand too, right? This is the other thing, is that people's brands play off each other. It's like archetypes, even in literature, right? You always have the protagonist and the antagonist. And in life, it's the same. And the media loves those stories, unfortunately. You know, they love it when two celebrities go at each other, right? On social or whatever. And there's a feud. And then they or even like you think, I mean, Meghan Markle, what happened to her in the palace, and the rivalry with Kate Middleton, this sort of, which I don't know, no one knows the full story, but they torqued it and amped it because it suited their purposes. And each of them had a very different brand, right? So it was like the clash of the brands in a way, and the media fed off this. So when you have a brand, you have to be conscious too. I mean, if people start to focus on you, like the anti-you starts focusing on you in some way, you have to sort of manage that too, because you don't want to get sucked into just a feud with one person and be defined by that. I think that's not positive for anyone.
Okay, so that's interesting for me, because I always find that when dealing with those haters out there, you can outsmart them, because hate is ignorant and it's not very well informed. So from your law background, do you employ those, like, is it like the Amber Heard trial idea where you can come in and say,
oh my God,
you know what, you can't really just fall back on everybody else is wrong and I'm right. We're going to have to pull it apart a little bit. Do you use those skills at all in helping to sway your audience or deflect the haters?
Well, yeah, that trial, there's so many things we could learn from that terrible experience that, you know, nobody won there. Basically, everyone got dragged through the mud with, you know, behind 1,000 horses kind of thing. And I think that it's not so much my law background I would use, really. I think it's more just more my communications background, because it's really often how you frame things. I mean, you could sell a product in many different ways. You could frame it in a positive frame or a negative frame. A political message can be framed as, like, you could frame it with hope, or you can frame it with fear. You get different responses. So it really is how you frame your brand too. And that changes over time as well. It also responds to the marketplace, because like right now, people are really concerned about the cost of living. It's like the top issue when you ask people, social, political, any issue, is the economy, right? So if you're selling a product, or if you're selling your own brand, let's say, it's like, how are you aware of what people are concerned about or they're looking for? And can you respond to that in a way that makes them pay attention to you and say, oh, I have something to offer you for this, right? It's something that it changes because the nature of what people are concerned about. COVID was, you know, I mean, look at how many businesses had to pivot completely even what they produced to stay alive in COVID. And restaurants had to turn to takeout and bottle service and this kind of thing to survive. So they rebranded themselves completely. And for an individual, it's also, it can be very similar, is that if the world changes, you've got to figure out how your brand fits into that and what can you offer that so that you stay current and stay interesting to people.
Well, first off, I just want to thank both Damon and yourself for mentioning Taylor Swift and Amber Heard, because our demographic.
What would we put them in a room together? What would happen?
I think just in terms of our SEO, I think that is going to be a massive impact. So
it's for you, Peter.
Always.
So thank you for that. We do at Pros and Conversations, we do appreciate any references to pop culture icons. But I wanted to get into talk a little bit about your book.
Thank you.
And and just sort of this idea of kind of what inspired you to write it.
What inspired me was a brand failure, actually. It's all about failure of brand. The Conservatives in Canada have lost 3 elections now consecutively. And after the last loss last fall, I thought, okay, they need some help. They need some advice. I'd been toying with the idea of writing another book for many years. And I felt I had something to say. I had something to offer. So I started working on it at that time. And the reason I say it's a brand failure is because in all 3 cases, the common thread was that they lost the trust of the voter. The voter didn't believe that they stood for what they said they did. They thought they had a hidden agenda, whether on abortion or guns, or they thought that they had, in the last leader, had run as a true blue conservative, and then he presented himself as more center right, more moderate. So the people who voted for him in the leadership were all confused and said, "Well, who are you?" So there was a real disconnect between the brand and the voter, and so the authenticity factor was just lost. So I said, okay, well, how do you get that back? And who do you need to get for the next 10 years, not just the next election, but who do the Conservatives need to appeal to survive as a party and to grow where they need to grow, which is among new Canadian voters, urban and suburban voters, and Gen Z millennials. Those are the 3 groups that they overlap. They are the future, essentially, of not just the party, but of the country. That's where the growth is. So the book addresses that. It looks at how populism and conservatism have interacted in the history of Canada, and how conservatives have always kind of lost out when their party split up, which is the last one was the Reform Party, of course. But those experiences and how we carry that forward to today, and we address the needs of those 3 groups. What are they looking for in politics? How do you make conservatism relevant to them? And should you be more populist or should you be more conservative when you talk to them? So that's really what the book is about. And then the leadership happened. And of course, the timeline for the book accelerated dramatically. And then now it's out in July 5th, as opposed to November. It was supposed to be. So it's in bookstores July 5th and on Amazon. And so far, people are very interested. I'm very, very pleased.
I'm definitely interested.
Oh, thank you. I'll get you a copy. I should stop giving them away. I keep saying that. I'll get you a copy. My publisher's like, no, stop.
I'm supportive. I'll buy a copy.
Take off your branding hat and put on your sales hat. Okay?
Yes, I know, right? I know. I'm too nice. There you go. Have a book.
It's very interesting how tied in branding is to politics, because you're absolutely right. And people want to vote for ideology, but then the leadership doesn't represent it properly, or they have a disconnect. And it's I think that's why you've seen so much voter apathy and low turnout. And I think you're brilliant for at least making the attempt to change what's the problem today.
Tasha, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been a fantastic conversation.
Well, thank you, Peter. And the book is, just shameless plug, The Right Path by me on Amazon or opbooks.com. You can find it there.
We're going to put a link. We're going to put a link up for the book, and because we are all about shameless plugs here on Pros and Conversations, as we are.
Oh, I would never have known. What? Don't.
And Damon, my co-conspirator and co-host, thank you very much for joining us again.
Always a pleasure.
My name is Peter Reynolds, and you've been listening to Pros and Conversations. See you next time.